People love to make Hitler analogies when talking about current events or, frankly, anything at all. My impression, though, is that most people do not understand how Hitler came into power. They just know that he took power and did bad things, which is true, but the actual story of how Hitler took power is really interesting and downright infuriating. Hitler was not elected into office as many people seem to believe. In the last free election in November of 1932, Hitler's party actually lost seats. He led the largest party, but they were nowhere close to a majority. The German people decisively rejected the Nazis. The Nazis were in such bad shape after the election that the German press even declared that Hitler's threat to democracy had passed. Hitler himself even talked about shooting himself. But in just a matter of weeks, things turned around dramatically for Hitler and the Nazis. And the reason why was because of the actions of just 3 individuals. That's right, just 3 guys doomed Germany and the world to the horrors of Nazism. And the crazy part is that at the beginning of the story, all 3 of these guys do not like Hitler. Hitler's path to power depended on becoming the Chancellor of Germany, which was the head of the government. That office was occupied by a guy named Kurt von Schleicher. Schleicher's goal was to turn Germany into a military dictatorship. The Chancellor was appointed by the President. The President was Paul von Hindenburg, a man who was so old that he was in the room when Germany was founded 60 years earlier. Hindenburg also did not believe in democracy, and his long-term goal was to restore the old Kaiser to his throne. The third player in our story is Franz von Papen, our third von. Papen was the Chancellor before Schleicher, who had removed him from power. Even though he wasn't very good at his job, Papen really enjoyed being the Chancellor. So his goal was to get revenge on Schleicher, get back into the Chancellorship, and turn Germany into a dictatorship. Yeah, whatever happened, German democracy did not have long to live. But while all 3 of these guys wanted to be tyrants in their own way, they were not Nazis, and they didn't really like the Nazis. But they didn't fanatically hate the Nazis like they fanatically hated the communists. In fact, they wanted to use the Nazis to achieve their goals. Schleicher tried to lure some Nazis away from Hitler with the promise of some power, but he found that the vast majority were fanatically loyal to Hitler. Hindenburg tried to get Hitler to support a government led by other conservatives and nationalists, but Hitler told him to pound sand. But Papen went further. He offered Hitler the vice-chancellorship in exchange for supporting Papen as chancellor. Hitler wasn't going to take this deal. He understood that the vice-chancellorship was a meaningless position, but he saw how hungry Papen was for revenge and for power, so he saw an opportunity and kept negotiating. See, I don't believe that Hitler was a smart man, but I do believe that he had something more valuable in the world of politics, which was a fanatical belief in himself and his mission. Now, this fanatical belief in himself and his mission led him to make some really bad decisions that ultimately led to his death and the destruction of Germany. But in the world of politics, it's valuable because it forces other people to bend to your will. And Hitler's will was clear. He wanted 2 things. He wanted the chancellorship, and he wanted control over the police. 2 things that would allow him to rig elections and crush his opponents. He demanded those 2 things, everything else was negotiable. Papen resisted for a while. He did not like the idea of Hitler being chancellor, but he realized that Hitler was not going to move from these 2 key demands. The choice facing Papen was to give in to Hitler's demands or to give up on ever holding power again. He wanted power, so he gave in to Hitler's demands. Papen did not have to do this. He could have lived the rest of his life as a rich aristocrat, going to parties, riding horses, traveling the world. Instead, he tipped over the first domino that would unleash Hitler's madness on Germany and the world. But Papen could not do this alone. The ultimate power to appoint the chancellor was in the hands of President Paul von Hindenburg. For Papen's plan to succeed, Hindenburg had to agree to the plan, fire Schleicher, and appoint Hitler as chancellor. And for that to happen, Schleicher needed to fail as chancellor. At the beginning of 1933, the conditions were there for Schleicher to succeed as chancellor. Germany was coming out of the Great Depression. The last restrictions from the Treaty of Versailles were being negotiated away. Hindenburg had promised Schleicher his full support. All Schleicher had to do to save the world from Hitler and the Nazis was to not screw up. Well, Schleicher screwed up. Schleicher turned out to be a really bad politician. He had multiple opportunities to secure his position, but every time he missed the opportunity out of arrogance or stupidity. But even with this bumbling around, Schleicher could have survived with Hindenburg's support. Unfortunately, he screwed that up as well. Now, part of this was because he tried to do the right thing. which is not always a good idea in politics. Basically, Hindenburg wanted the German government to bail out his rich, aristocratic, land-owning buddies who had been hit hard by the Great Depression. Schleicher was reluctant to give a bailout to a bunch of rich aristocrats at a time when millions of German workers were unemployed and on welfare. Hindenburg was not pleased by this hesitation and bullied Schleicher into changing course. This, along with some personal missteps, really hurt Schleicher's relationship with Hindenburg. By the middle of January, Schleicher faced a political crisis he could not remove himself from and did not have the backing of Hindenburg. That's when Papen swooped in. He had a great relationship with Hindenburg. And while Hindenburg did not trust Hitler, he did trust Papen. So if Papen said that Hitler should be chancellor, Hindenburg was inclined to listen. Hindenburg's backing gave Hitler a clear shot at the chancellorship. However, details still had to be worked out, and all three of these men, Papen, Schleicher, and Hindenburg, had opportunities to change course. And Papen's delusions really come out in this period because people would talk to him and be like, hey, it seems like a really bad idea to give this Hitler guy the most powerful position in Germany, plus the police. And Papen would say, well, that's okay. We'll control the other positions, and we're like so much smarter than him, so we will control him.
Not a great plan.
And when Schleicher realized what was going on, he actually went to Hindenburg and endorsed Hitler as chancellor in an attempt to retain some influence. So all the pieces came together, and on January 30th, Adolf Hitler was sworn in as the chancellor of the German Republic. He vowed to protect and defend the very republic that he intended to destroy. It only took a few months. Hitler called new elections, and by holding control over the police, he ensured they would not be free elections. Yet even with opposition newspapers shut down, unrestrained violence on the streets, and tens of thousands of so-called poll watchers on election day, the Nazis could only get 43% of the vote. But step by step, Hitler consolidated power, first by crushing the communists, then the left-of-center social democrats, then the conservative parties, and finally the other nationalist parties that had been so critical to his success. The only person who could have stopped Hitler during this process was President Paul von Hindenburg, who still had the support of the military and could have removed Hitler from power. However, from what I can tell, it seems like Hindenburg liked Hitler in power, and he liked the fact that the chaos of German democracy had been brought to an end. Hindenburg died in 1934, having been more responsible than anyone else for the rise of Adolf Hitler. Ex-Chancellor Schleicher was in the political wilderness for most of 1933, but when he tried to make a political comeback in 1934, Hitler had him murdered. Papen was completely sidelined in Hitler's government, and after Hitler's thugs ransacked his office and murdered 3 of his close associates, Papen resigned and lived the rest of his life, well, as a rich aristocrat, going to parties, riding horses, and working cushy diplomatic jobs. So that's how Hitler came to power. These 3 men, Franz von Papen, Kurt von Schleicher, and ultimately Paul von Hindenburg, were given the opportunity to determine the fate of a great nation. Had those 3 men been a little bit wiser and made different choices, then Hitler never would have came to power, Europe would not have been destroyed, tens of millions of lives would not have been cut short, communism would have been contained, the world would have been a much better place. Fate put those 3 men in a position to stop all of that. They chose not to. Hitler could have been stopped if only better people were standing in his way.